Alright, so this is going to be my review of the First War mouse pad by Padsmith. It's a speed pad, and I've been using it for the past little while. And I just figured I would give a review. This hasn't been sent out or anything, and this is not sponsored. So yeah, non-biased reviewer, me. So yeah, I guess I'll just get on with it. The first thing I'll just talk about is like the texture. Um, Very very fast. It's actually like really fast. As you can see, I'm just like kind of flicking my mouse around, and this is a X1R, so it's not even like a super lightweight mouse. It's kind of like in the medium to heavy-ish mouse range, being around like 70 grams ish, which is a lot of grams. This is not a very light mouse by any means, and if I put lighter mice on it on this pad, it'll definitely play a lot faster. So yeah, very fast pad, and on top of being very fast, very smooth as well. Like it's not grainy with a lot of fast pads like Cordura. Or hybrid pads like the like Heian and the 1 million copies of the Heian. Um, they have this grainier texture, which does give a bit of control, but for tracking, I think that a lot of people will prefer the smoothness. It'll make it easier to, have that extra little bit of control when you're tracking. There's also a bit of plushiness, so even though this doesn't have a lot of control just by the surface, um, the plushiness does let you still hit flicks and stuff like that. So if you're one of those people who like to push down really hard into the mouse pad, then the plushiness of this pad is going to let you do that. You're going to be able to really sink into the mouse pad and be able to hit your shots like that. So in terms of just like how it actually plays, just mouse onto the pad, really nice for tracking. If you're playing TAC FPSs and stuff like that where it requires a lot of flicking, or if you're playing games that have lots of big movements like this, you're not gonna get a lot of control out of that. Uh, but it's really nice for tracking. Really good for games like Call of Duty or Apex Legends where you've got lots of target switching followed by smooth tracking. The size of the pad, it's pretty standard, 420 by 490, or so they want you to think. When I actually measure this pad, instead of being what it's advertised at, it actually clocks in at about 480, 82-ish, I'll say 482, 483-ish width, which is about a 7 or 8 millimeter loss in width, and about a 1 or 2 millimeter loss on the height. So clearly they're scamming everybody. In actuality, it's fine. There's no problems with it. It's not small by any means. It's not large either. I wish more companies moved on to like 530 by 500 pads or like 550 by 500 pads. Just giving that little bit of extra room to move around more freely, I think would be really nice. But this is definitely not a bad size either, especially considering it's meant for tracking though. I think that anything smaller than this would not be usable because if you're tracking a target for a long time, you're going to start running into the edges and stuff, especially on low sense. For flickier pads or for TAC FPS pads, like really control-based pads, it's not very it's not a big issue to have it be a little bit smaller because most of the time you're going to flick. You'll be able to like kind of readjust and whatnot. But for a pad like this, which is, in my opinion at least, very optimized for tracking based games, definitely should be at least this size. Like this is bare minimum in my opinion. This is like the same size as the Artisan mouse pads though, I'm pretty sure. So yeah, it's not going to be a big issue though. The base of the pad, it's a pretty standard rubber base. It moves around a little bit because it's not Japanese porcelain foam, but it's also pretty standard. Yeah, it's standard. Honestly, it's not terrible, and it's not the best thing in the world either. It's basically what you get on your average, decent to high quality pad. Feels very similar to pretty much like all the other pads in the world. Um, The stitching, however, is it'll be easier for me to just show the issues. So as you can see, the stitching on this side, which I have not used, it's really flat, nice, right? There's a little issue here where from here to here on the pad, the stitching's actually gone over twice. I don't know if you can see that, if it like shows up really well. From here to here, the stitching's actually been gone over twice. That side's not going to actually be used in game. It sits like right next to my keyboard when I actually use it, so it doesn't actually affect me in game. Just thought I'd mention that the stitching does go over a bit, but it doesn't actually mean anything. What actually matters is that the side that I have been using, the stitching has frayed a ton. I've been using this pad for maybe 1 to 2 months now. Started getting like this after the first couple weeks though. Started noticing some fraying and stuff like that all over, on both the top and the bottom, like both sides, top and bottom. Noticing a lot of fraying, and I think a major part of that reason is when I look really closely at the stitching that they used, they make it really, really thin, but very, very, very dense. And so what that does is that it gives you a very smooth, nice, like really, really smooth feeling because it's very, very dense and thin. But it ends up having worse quality. It'll break faster over time, I feel like, because the threads are thinner. So even though it does feel like smoother and nicer out of the box, and even though because they're using thinner threads, it'll be more flush with the top of the pad, I think that they should actually go for slightly thicker threads with a less dense, threading on the edges, because honestly, the stitching on the edges, going a little bit thicker to prevent stuff like this from happening is going to be well worth the extra, like, I don't know, maybe like fucking 1/100th of a millimeter or whatever that you're going to add on to the threading, right? I don't know. I just think that it's like just not really high quality. It broke like really, or not started breaking. I wouldn't say that like the pad's broken, but it started getting damaged like really, really quickly. And that's probably one of the biggest issues. Actually, I'd say that it's the second biggest, right behind the biggest issue, in my opinion, which is the humidity. As you can see, I've got a fan here. I've also got one over here. Why? Because if I don't keep my hand like completely dry, this pad just doesn't work. My arm will stick to it, and then, and then my mouse movements, they will be fast, but then my arm just feels like mud, and I have so much limited range of motion. A lot of people say, oh, we'll just get an arm sleeve, but arm sleeve, it works for some people, but for me, without that feeling of my arm on the pad, I can't aim as well. I need that kind of feedback that I get from moving my arm on the pad in order to play really, really well, and I just don't feel enough with the arm pad on. I just gotta say, it's not really, really good for humidity. Moving a little bit more into like later, not later, it's still pretty early, but like in fall and like winter and stuff, I feel like this is gonna be really nice pad. But especially during the summer when I first got this, it was really, really bad, hard to use. Probably the worst out of the pads that I use most often. I don't know what causes it, but it's just not very good in humidity. The actual glide, like mouse to mouse pad, doesn't change whether it's like humid or not. Like I bet I could soak this thing and it would still glide fast. It's just my arm sticks. And that's another thing that I think that more mouse pad companies gotta pay attention to. The friction on the mouse feet is not the only thing that matters, but the friction that happens with your arm. If your arm is stuck there and you can't move it, that's not good either. I think that companies should work more towards creating, mouse pads that are a little bit more friendly to the skin as well. But yeah, the actual abrasiveness on the skin isn't there isn't any, because it's really, really smooth and stuff. No abrasiveness. Feels really, really soft. But my arm just sticks to it, and I don't like that. So yeah. basically, overall review is that this mouse pad is a tracking king, in my opinion. If you play with your arm up like this for extra smoothness when tracking, I know a lot of people who put like, instead of going like this, they go like this, and my arm is still touching, but it's not like really rooted into the pad. Or I know even people who will play like this with their arm just slightly above the pad. And if you're one of those people, I heavily recommend this pad because you're not going to get affected by the stitching. You're not going to get affected by humidity because it only affects me on the skin, really. The actual like mouse on the pad, it's not bad, by the way. Don't yell at me for using dot skates, okay? Please, okay? Anyways, yeah. So yeah, it's not actually going to affect you, all the issues with this pad. If you're playing just tracking and going like this, the basing is like the third worst issue, like just after the humidity and stitching, and that's also not going to affect you if you're just tracking like this. It really only happens, and the pad only really moves with these really big, long motions. So if you're an Apex, Call of Duty player, whatever, right? Tracking based games where you're just arm up, whatever, really low amount of contact with your hand, this pad is going to be nice. Very smooth, very nice and fast, easy to change directions and make flicks and stuff like that. Heavily recommend this pad for anybody who is fitting that kind of niche. Otherwise, if you play a variety of different games, if you play tag FPSs and stuff like that, pad might not be the best for you, and I can't very heavily recommend it. But yeah, thanks for watching. I guess I might start reviewing like one of the 100 quadrillion million mice that I have sometime. But yeah, I guess I'll see you all later. Peace.